Good morning. We have a lot to get to, so let's get started. Okay? We left off talking about water-soluble hormones. Okay? We left off talking about how the two types of hormones work. Okay? And what's the main difference between a lipid-soluble hormone and a water-soluble hormone in their mechanism of action? And crickets. Okay. Do I need to rephrase the question? Nick?
The lipid-soluble hormones, they can go across the phospholipid bilayer and then they go straight into the nucleus?
Well, there's a step in between. What's the step in between?
Doesn't it then have to bond to a carrier protein on the inside?
Okay, it is a carrier protein, but a hormone binds to its receptor. All right. So in a lipid-soluble hormone, where's the receptor? Inside the cell. And in a water-soluble hormone, where's the receptor? On the membrane. And then how does the action, the mechanism of the hormone that's on the outside of the membrane, how does it get its information into the cell? Signal transduction pathway. And we talked about that uses what? That pathway uses what? A second messenger. Okay? So the production of a second messenger. And what were the advantages of a second messenger system? Why use a second messenger system? Well, first off, to get the message in, right? What else? Jillian?
You can send the message to many different pathways.
All right, so we can diversify, and when we send that message to many different pathways, there's a diversification. And then also, because now we've activated many different pathways, we can do what? Amplification. Okay, good. All right, so you have, that brings us to where we're at right now. Right, so we have those multitude of results that can be, or the multitude of action that can be started from a single receptor binding to its ligand. Okay? So then you can have enzymes within the cell can be activated or inhibited. Growth can be stimulated or inhibited. Okay? This goes to your diversification of response. Okay? So you can increase cellular secretions. So if, for this one right here, if we have cellular secretions can be released. Give me an example. So what we're having is we have a hormone that's binding to a receptor and then targeting a receptor to produce something. Let's say, in this case, it's another hormone. What is that stimulation called? And crickets again. Hormonal stimulation, good, all right. All right, good. Okay? Membrane permeability can be changed. Membrane permeability to what? What do you think? Give me an example of something the membrane permeability can be changed from. Change to, from? Permeability to what? Think. Ions? Yeah, ions is probably a good one. Okay, good. All right. And with that, so right underneath that, what do you see? So if we change permeability of ions here can be changed, and then right underneath that I put muscles can be contracted or even relaxed. Okay? Contraction of muscles, mainly smooth muscles. Right? Think about dilation, vasodilation, vasoconstriction. Okay? And then so you have your signaling pathway advantages, your amplification. Okay? And also because of this, the diversification and the amplification that's there and the many pathways that can be stimulated from one receptor through the second messenger, every single step along that pathway is also a place where that pathway can be regulated or shut off. Okay? So let's just think about it like this. In fact, there's a typical pathway called the MAP kinase pathway. Okay, it's a signal transduction, and really you have this what's called a MAP kinase. It's mitogen activating protein kinase. You don't have to know about it. This is just an example of how it works. All right? And that kinase is a enzyme within the signal transduction pathway, which signals another one called ERK. Okay? And then there's like 3 more kinases above that get to this MAP kinase. You want to know what those names are? MAP kinase kinase. And then the one before that is MAP kinase kinase kinase. All right? Doesn't matter. You don't have to know the names. It's an example. Each one of these, whether it be an enzyme, let's say 1, 2, 3, say that's 4, 5. 5 different enzymes in this pathway. And there's more, right? This is oversimplifying it. But each one of those enzymes is also a target for potential regulation. Okay? Some other enzyme can shut it off or inhibit it in some way. Okay? So there's lots of diversification, amplification, and plenty of steps and opportunities for regulation. Okay? And so you have ways to quickly inactivate these mechanisms. Right? You respond to a hormone, shut it off. Questions on that, on the signal transduction pathways? So let's go through 2 examples of water-soluble hormones. Glucagon. Glucagon comes from the pancreas, right, and is released when blood sugar is low. What type of stimulation is that? We talked about hormonal stimulation a couple minutes ago. What type of stimulation is this? Who said it over here? Fiona, did you say it? Humoral. Humoral, responding to a level of something in the blood, right? So now what happens, glucagon is released into the blood, travels around, binds to its receptors, okay? One of their target cells is in hepatocytes in the liver, right? Liver cell increases in cyclic AMP synthesis. So inside the cell, so cyclic AMP is an example of what? It's a water-soluble receptor. Glucagon binds to its receptor, or water-soluble hormone, binds to its receptor, and then cyclic AMP goes up. What is that? What is cyclic AMP then? Are you asking or are you telling me? Okay, it's the second messenger, right? Good. And that activates kinase A. Kinase A phosphorylates other enzymes, leading to the release of glucose from the cell. Okay? Pretty straightforward, right? An example of a second messenger. Oxytocin, all right, is released from the posterior pituitary. We'll go over that in a little bit. All right, during labor and delivery, increases contractions of the uterine muscle. Okay, it binds to the receptor smooth muscle cells in the uterus, and the muscle cell increases production of IP3. What's IP3 then in this case? Jillian? The second messenger. Good. And when that second messenger now increases intracellular calcium. Intracellular calcium within a smooth muscle cell would cause contraction. All right? Eventually, those continue to increase in frequency and intensity, eventually until the baby is, or the fetus, I don't know, baby is expelled from the birth canal. Okay? So 2 examples of water-soluble hormones in their action. So, question. What determines a target cell's response to the hormone? So, for instance, we have the uterine muscle cells have receptors for oxytocin. Yes? Okay. So, why is it that over time that oxytocin is produced and you have a response, a very high level response to oxytocin hormone during pregnancy and not necessarily during not pregnancy? Let's think about this. What is going to determine the target tissue's response to the hormone? Fiona? Receptors. Okay? All right, so first off, receptors, whether they're present. Okay? So I'm going to tell you this over time during pregnancy. Okay? that as pregnancy ensues, there's a high level of progesterone. Progesterone actually helps to stimulate the production of more oxytocin receptors in the uterus, so that at the time of childbirth, you have a lot of receptors there. More receptors means what? More response. More receptors, more response. Because now you can respond to the same number, same amount of hormone that's in the blood, but there's more receptors to it. Goes from there. Okay? So that's one. More receptors, more response. And we can say what's called upregulation and downregulation. I just gave you an example of upregulation. Over time, progesterone upregulates the presence of oxytocin receptors in the uterine wall, the uterine muscle wall. Okay, what we call the myometrium. Okay? So now they can, right? On the flip side of that, there's downregulation. Okay? We can downregulate receptors. Okay? Give you another example. If you put so much hormone and you expose it, you expose a cell to hormone over and over and over again. Some cells, and depending on the type of hormone the receptor we're talking about, they actually internalize the receptor. Okay? So this receptor here, right, gets taken into the cell. How many, now if I take a receptor inside the cell, how many receptors are left on the membrane to respond to hormone? Less. Less hormone receptors outside, less response in the cell. That's downregulation. We're taking them into, or we're not producing anymore, or enough, less number. Okay? And then secondly, we have interactions with other hormones. Right? So in lab, you probably went over, you went over, how many of you did your Physio X activity in lab, activity number 1, with our lovely rats dragging from one place to another? What did you use as what hormone were you looking at? Wow, you guys got a lot out of that.
There was a few, right?
There was one hormone, so in activity 1 where you're using the rats and you're looking at metabolic rate, what hormone were you looking at? Montana. Thyroxine. And then, so you looked at thyroxine and TSH, right? But what was the other thing? There was one other thing you looked at. And I'm going to use it as an example, but it was propylthiouracil, right? Yes? And that was an inhibitor. Now, it's not a natural inhibitor, but it's inhibitor to what? Thyroxine. So if you kind of extrapolate that idea that this inhibitor is going to inhibit the action of thyroxine, you have two cells here, okay? You have this cell that has multiple receptors. All right? There's lots of proteins on the outside of cells, or inside cells. And so you have lots of hormones that go together, that are floating around. They're all targeting one cell. Now, two hormones bind. One could be inhibiting. One could be stimulating. They can work together. They can work against one another. So we have synergistic interactions. Two things, two hormones act on a target cell, and they do something to increase whatever is there, all right? They work together. They produce a greater effect. They have permissive, right? One hormone, the first hormone, actually allows the action of a second hormone. And then third, kind of in your idea of having an inhibitor, is the antagonistic effect. One hormone is going to work against or opposite of the other. All right, so we have numbers of receptors can influence how a cell reacts to a hormone, and then we also have the presence of other hormones that will influence how a cell or an organ reacts to a hormone. Questions on that? All right, any other general questions on hormone action? Okay, your silence is deafening. All right, so let's start looking at endocrine glands. We're going to start at what some anatomists, endocrinologists call the master gland or the master regulatory gland, the hypothalamus and the pituitary. We say this because the hypothalamus helps regulate many homeostatic mechanisms and also regulates many other endocrine organs, right? Even through its action of just targeting the pituitary. Okay? So the hypothalamus controls the pituitary, which then helps control the thyroid, the adrenal, the liver, testes, ovaries, right? And then from there, all of those those hormones target many different cells. All right? We know where the pituitary lies. The pituitary is also called the hypophysis. It's divided into two parts, right? An anterior and posterior. We'll go over that in a second. It lies inferior and attached, really attached to the hypothalamus, right, via the infundibulum. And it sits in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. So if you remember, visually think back to your bone, your cranial test, right? You're looking superior view, you're looking down, there's that little saddle. That's what sella turcica stands for, Turkish saddle, where the pituitary sits in. Okay? It's a pea-sized organ, all right? And it's partitioned into anterior and posterior lobes, right? And they look different. They have different cellular components, constituents, because they actually are derived from different embryonic origin. Okay? The anterior pituitary has mainly glandular epithelial cells because it is derived from the epithelium of what ends up becoming the roof of your mouth. And the posterior pituitary is mainly neurosecretory cells. They are neuroendocrine in origin, or they're nervous system in origin, all right, because it comes from the neural tube as it was developing. So this is what it looks like. Okay, your hypothalamus sits in, and then above, up here, would be the thalamus and the third ventricle, right, hypothalamus, and you have this couple particular nuclei, areas of cells that do certain things. Okay, your paraventricular nucleus, this area of the hypothalamus, produces oxytocin, and your supraoptic nucleus, right, produces ADH, antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. Okay, and where do they go? I actually have neurons that extend out through here, right, through the infundibulum, and then innervate into the posterior pituitary. Okay, you see the optic chiasm, and then you have that hypophyseal tract. That's that group of neurons, the infundibulum, right, and then you have the two parts of the pituitary gland. Okay, you have the pars nervosa, which is the posterior pituitary, and then you have the anterior pituitary, which actually is broken up into a couple different parts, and we'll see that in a second. Okay, so your posterior pituitary is also known as the neurohypophysis. Neuro because what's its embryonic origin? It comes from nervous system. Okay, it's a neural part, develops as a bud from the developing hypothalamus, right? And we call it the pars nervosa and the infundibulum together, right? And we have the different parts that I talked about, right? The paraventricular and the supraoptic nuclei. Who dinged? Okay, the adenohypophysis, or the anterior pituitary. Adeno, right? Every time you see adeno, that refers to epithelium or some type of glandular type of tissue, right? Adenoma, it's a glandular type of cancer. All right? And it's partitioned into three areas. So we have the pars nervosa, okay? And then we have the other, that's the posterior pituitary. And then, the anterior pituitary is divided into three pars parts. Pars distalis, pars tuberalis, and pars intermedia, right? And they're kind of, let's make this a little smaller so you can see it. All right, scant region between the two. All right. Questions on the basic structure. Now, what are these two organs together going to produce? What are we talking about in terms of their production right now? Hormones. And hormones travel through the blood. So, have I said anything about blood right now? Is it necessary that these organs produce hormones that get into the blood should there be a presence of blood cells? Otherwise, how are they going to produce hormones and not get into the blood? Okay? So, that brings us to this. Okay? There's a very intricate complex of blood vessels that goes between the hypothalamus and the pituitary. Actually, it's a specialized circulation. Okay? So what you see here in red signifies arterial or oxygenated blood, and then you have goes into blue, which is venous blood. Okay? So this is what we call a portal system. Okay? A portal system means that it doesn't follow the normal artery, arterial, right, capillary, venous, venual vein, right? Or capillary, venual vein. All right? It doesn't necessarily follow that normal track. Okay? So you have arterial blood that comes into here, into the hypothalamus, and then it goes through the pituitary before it gets into the venous system. Okay? What does that allow the hypothalamus and the pituitary to do? Why is that relationship important? What does the hypothalamus do? Let's go back to lab, what you did, right? You did that TSH. Where did TSH come from? Where does TSH come from?
Thyroid.
Doesn't come, it targets the thyroid. Comes from the hypothalamus, but it targets the
Thyroid.
How does it get there?
Pituitary.
Well, it goes for the blood, right? It goes through this portal system. The hypothalamus is going to target many of the hormones most of the hormones that the hypothalamus produces is going to target the anterior pituitary. How does it get there? Well, it gets there through this system right here. There's mostly blood over here, right? We're going to produce a hormone in the hypothalamus, and it's going to get into and get to the pituitary, the anterior pituitary, by this portal system. Okay? So structure and function. Function of the hypothalamus is to help to control the anterior pituitary. The structure of the blood vessels allows it to happen. Okay? And then over here, this is how the two develop. And I wanted to put that in so you kind of see where you have the hypophyseal pouch that will end up becoming your anterior pituitary. It's derived from the oral cavity. Eventually you end up with your pars nervosa versus the pars tuberalis, intermedialis, and the distalis. Questions? All right. Close that. Okay. So the posterior pituitary is a storage and release site for oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Where is it produced, though? Hypothalamus. All right? So oxytocin is made in the paraventricular nucleus, while ADH, also known as vasopressin, is made in the supraoptic nucleus. Okay? Oxytocin, we've already mentioned it's one of its important functions in uterine contraction. Also helps in milk production after pregnancy. Right? And what we all are probably most associated with it is emotional bonding. Okay? Oxytocin is the quote-unquote love hormone. You get surges of that when you get emotional responses to things. Yay! Oh, puppies. Puppies are good. Okay? Antidiuretic hormone works. It helps to decrease urine production, stimulate thirst, constrict blood vessels, right, in response to different ion concentrations in the blood, right? So what would its target organ be? It'll work on the kidneys, right? And also some other target organs. Well, we'll talk about that next semester when we go through the urinary system. All right? So let's continue with our hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland. Hypothalamus secretes regulatory hormones. All right, so that covers really the relationship between hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary. And these regulatory hormones travel through that portal system we mentioned, all right, to the pituitary, and it helps regulate the production of hormones from the pituitary. So you have two different types. You have hormones that stimulate the release of other hormones, hormonal stimulation, and you have hormones that inhibit the release of other hormones. So they either increase or decrease the release of hormones from the pituitary, the anterior pituitary. Including those, you have thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH, prolactin releasing hormone, PRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is one of my favorites, GnRH, cortico releasing hormone, CRH, and growth hormone releasing hormone, GRH. So basically, with the names, they're telling you what they're going to do, right? Thyrotropin releasing hormone. It's going to stimulate the release of thyrotropin. Well, thyrotropin is TSH from the pituitary. Okay? Then you have inhibiting hormones, prolactin inhibiting hormone, and growth inhibiting hormone, or growth hormone inhibiting hormone. All right? All of those, their target organ is the
Anterior pituitary.
way to go, Lucas. Thank you. Thank you for being awake today. All right. So, their target is the anterior pituitary. Let's look at the anterior pituitary then. All right. Thyroid, it produces a number of hormones. Here they are. TSH, prolactin, ACTH, or also known as corticotropin, or adenocorticotropin. All right. And then gonadotropins, including FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, LH, luteinizing hormone, which act on the testes and the ovaries. All right, and then growth hormone, also called somatotropin. Okay, and each of these, all right, I'm not going to go through them right now, but because we're going to go through them in a little bit more detail when we talk about as we go through here. All right, so each of them are stimulated by and regulated by what? Hormones from where? The hypothalamus. All right, and then they have a litany of different target organs. All right, so here's the picture that's in your textbook, from your textbook, showing you kind of what they are, and they're color-coded. All your releasing hormones from the hypothalamus, the inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus, and then the anterior pituitary hormones. You have your thyroid stimulating hormone, prolactin, FSH, LH, ACTH, and then growth hormone. Okay? And it gives you a basic, a short explanation of the action of those hormones. Okay? We're going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail. So, let's start with growth hormone. Growth hormone, what do you think growth hormone stimulates? Growth. All right. It's not, again, biologists are not very unique when we come up with naming things. Okay? We have a lot to remember. Let's make it easy. Okay? Growth hormone stimulates growth. Right? It's stimulation of linear growth at the epiphyseal plate. So, structure, right? Height, size, hypertrophy of muscle, right? And also release of nutrients from storage into the blood. Why would growth hormone stimulate the release of nutrients? What do your cells need to grow? Nutrients. All right? So they're stimulated and they go on. Okay? So like, I don't know, glucose from storage. So what do we do? What do you need to do to release nutrients? Where do you store some nutrients? In what?
The liver.
In the liver, yes. In the form of?
Glucagon.
Not glucagon. Glycogen. Good. What else do you store nutrients? Skeletal muscles. There's other glycogen there as well. Yes. What else? Adipose tissue. So what's going to happen is growth hormone is going to stimulate the liver to break down glycogen to make glucose, increase blood sugar levels. It's also going to stimulate adipose tissue to break down fats into glucose. All right? And GH, or growth hormone, is stimulated by growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. The release of growth hormone is influenced by certain things. Age, time of day, which we call what? Your normal circadian rhythm. Okay? Nutrient levels. We just talked about what growth hormone is going to do, and they're going to increase nutrient levels, right? So if nutrient levels go down, what's going to happen? Growth hormone is going to go up, right, in order to help nutrients levels to go back up. And it's also influenced by stress and exercise. Okay, and there's some little pictures in your book showing about the relationship of that. Okay. Recently, okay, with our American infatuation with not growing old, okay, recently it has become popular to take growth hormone supplementation, right? Especially in men, that are above 40 and 50 years old, okay? Because this is what happens. Growth hormone, micrograms per microliter over time, you kind of bottom out after 35, and it continues to go down. So what happens after 35, 40 years old in men and women? Can they make muscle as well? No, they can't. Okay? Can they break down fat as well? It takes longer, it takes more effort in the gym to get the results that you had when you were 20. Part of that is related to this, right? And then the second graph down there, you tell me, what do you see from that second graph? That bottom panel. It's secreted the most at night. So that's your circadian rhythm. At night or just before, right? So what's happened all day here? Right, so you wake up. Oh, that's green. Let's get rid of that. Okay, let's do red. So you're sleeping, and then this is you wake up during the day, and now what has happened all day? You've decreased your nutrients, you've worked, right, and now you get that response to produce growth hormone at the day. Okay?
So is it better to work out later in the day?
What do you think? I don't know if there's a better time.
Based on that chart, though?
Based on that chart, well, how fast do you think this is going to work? Do you think that working out in the morning, first thing in the morning, is going to, versus at night, and your growth hormone level is going to significantly affect your gains? Lucas is shaking his head. He's like, no, I'm not waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Forget that. What do you think?
I have no idea.
Well, think about, is this an immediate thing?
No.
No. Okay? So working out, time of day, I don't think is related to this. And it's not going to really affect your gains. It's more of a kind of your circadian rhythm, what you're going to feel better doing. Okay? Good question, though. Okay? Growth hormone targets hepatocytes, the liver. Okay, more than that. Look at that. And it releases another hormone that we don't really talk about. Insulin-like growth factors, IGFs, and there's a multitude of them. And all your cells have either receptors for growth hormone or IGF, insulin-like growth factor, right? Because they're going to help work together and stimulate other tissues to do the different things growth hormone stimulates your body to do. But second to that, hepatocytes also increase glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. What are those two things? What's glycogenolysis? It's not making glycogen. That's glycogenesis. It's breaking down glycogen. What's gluconeogenesis? We're producing glucose from other stuff, right? We're producing glucose. So we're going to break down glycogen into glucose subunits, and we're going to produce new glucose from other things. Okay? And bone and muscle are particularly responsive to growth hormone. So, let me ask you. We're going to skip over to this one right here. Okay? Here's all the different aspects of growth hormone, stimulus. This is in your book. I'll leave this up. This is also in the slides. All right? The relationship that happens, growth hormone released from the anterior pituitary, all right, targets the liver in this case, and you get production of all these things, and then you have multitude of different effectors as well. Okay? So either growth hormone can work directly on cells to elicit responses, or it can also work indirectly through the production of IGFs, right, insulin-like growth factors. Here's a nice little flow chart that I found that I like quite a bit. Kind of simplifies things. Growth hormone, indirect actions, growth promoting, or direct actions, metabolic and anti-insulin. Right? And that's going to break down fat. It's going to cause carbohydrate metabolism. And then your indirect actions, growth promoting, probably through IGFs, liver and other tissues. IGFs are going to stimulate skeletal and extraskeletal growth, right? Increase protein synthesis, etc. All right, so I put that in there for you as well. So, what happens when we have problems with growth hormone? All right, I'll give you an example. My best man in my wedding, okay, he lives out in Minnesota. He has 2 sons, okay? One is 2 years older than the younger one, okay? Now, you've all gone to your pediatrician, right? And what do you do when you go to the pediatrician? First thing, you get weight and height. And then over time they give you, you're at this percentile and that percentile, right? Okay. Well, his older son, okay, was always on the low end, 10%, 20%. Okay? Now, he's a tall, skinny guy, and his wife is tall and skinny. And I mean skinny, like both of them are thin, rail thin. So they figured, all right, the doctor's like, well, have you seen your body type? And have you seen his father's body type and his mother's body type? He's probably going to be pretty thin. Okay. But when he got to a point in his 9th birthday, 9th, where his brother, who was 6 or 7, was actually bigger and heavier than he was, right, than the older brother, that raised a flag. There's one red flag, right? Second, he finally fell off the chart. He went from 20th percentile to 15 to 10 over time. Eventually, he was not on that percentile anymore. Second red flag. So what did the doctor suggest? Well, let's get a blood test. Lo and behold, they found out he has low levels of growth hormone. Okay? They found out. Now what's the treatment?
Supplement growth hormone.
Supplement growth hormone. They did that for 2 years, right? And what ended up happening, he actually primed the system and he picked up his own endogenous production of growth hormone so they could actually stop. In the 2 years, he grew about 5 inches and put on about 15 to 20 pounds. Okay? So here is examples of growth hormone deficiency. We call pituitary dwarfism. And I like this picture because it puts a normal height individual next to someone who has pituitary dwarfism, a growth hormone deficiency, And then next to them, too much growth hormone from the beginning, right? Pituitary gigantism. Over time, that person has continued a high level, an excessive level of growth hormone and has increased stature and size. Okay? And that starts from infancy or childhood on. Now, what happens when you have too much growth hormone as an adult? That's what we call acromegaly. Okay? Excessive growth hormone as an adult. Now, you still have growth hormone receptors. Okay? They don't go away, but your production of growth hormone kind of goes like this over time, right? It goes kind of like times this way, levels is this, and it goes, right? But if you end up increasing this and it stays up here, okay, when you get older, you still have growth hormones. Those bones still thicken, right? The enlargements of the bones, face, hands, and feet. Increased release of glucose, because that's what growth hormone does. It stimulates the release of glucose. So you have high levels, right? Your internal organs increase in size, and this is a result of the loss of feedback. Because growth hormone, high levels of growth hormone would stop what? So, if I have high levels of growth hormone, what's that going to do? What are we talking about here? What three organs?
Liver.
Okay, what two organs are we really talking about that are going to control this? We have to have the hypothalamus, right? And what else? Where does growth hormone come from? So the anterior pituitary, and this is chicken scratch, I'm sorry. But anterior pituitary. So high growth hormone is going to feed back to what? What comes from the hypothalamus? Growth hormone, releasing hormone, which targets the anterior pituitary to produce growth hormone. Okay? So this is, and then we have this other one that's over here, growth inhibiting hormone, that actually stops this. Right? That helps stop that release. So in some ways, what's happening? In somewhere in this acromegaly, during that elevated level of growth hormone isn't feeding back and stopping these. All right? In some way, there's a disruption. Okay? And that leads to a sustained growth hormone production and leads to the symptoms you see there. Questions on growth hormone? Yes? No? Maybe? Okay, we'll stop there. We'll pick up the thyroid on Monday. We'll finish thyroid on Monday, and we'll probably get through the adrenal gland on Monday as well. If you have any questions, all right, let me know. This video and your slides are already posted on Blackboard. Okay? Don't forget, next week we have our fourth exam, right? We'll get through whatever we get through Wednesday.
In that flowchart, didn't you say it was the insulin growth factor?